Ease, we're all about calculating the best high for you. Ran out of shows to watch for the second time this week? Order an indica pre-roll. Social distance park hang? Pair that awkward picnic with a vaporizer. See, we're like your weed guy, but 420% nerdier. So just worry about when you're going to take that edible and let us do the rest. Ease, highly calculated cannabis delivery. Get 30% off your first order with promo code NERD at ease.com. That's EAZE.com. At Ease, we're all about calculating the best high for you. Ran out of shows to watch for the second time this week? Order an indica pre-roll. Social distance park hang? Pair that awkward picnic with a vaporizer. See, we're like your weed guy, but 420% nerdier. So just worry about when you're going to take that edible and let us do the rest. Ease, highly calculated cannabis delivery. Get 30% off your first order with promo code NERD at ease.com. That's EAZE.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. Hey, what's up, everybody, and greetings from Sin City. Usually, we do our live streams at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Sunday nights. Tomorrow, I'm thinking we're going to bump that back till about 8:15, 8:30 to give me some time to wrap up after the Super Bowl and prepare to hop on the live stream to have our weekly chat. So look for the live stream to be a little bit late tomorrow, 8:15-ish, and we'll be off and running. As for our article this morning, we're going to continue on with our weekly talk about Robert Maxwell in the Maxwell series here. Now, each Saturday, I'm going to be exploring the Maxwell family a little bit deeper. Right now, we're talking about Robert. We'll be moving on to Ghislaine's sisters, Ghislaine's brothers, and the rest of the Maxwell family as well, as we try and put an umbrella over the whole entire clan. Today, we're going to continue that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Robert Maxwell and how he rose from poverty and helped corrupt his daughter Ghislaine, as reported in an article from the New York Post this morning. So let's dive into this article and let's continue our discussion about Robert Maxwell and the Maxwell family. This article is from the New York Post, and the author is Mary Kay Linge. Headline: How Robert Maxwell Rose from Poverty and Corrupted His Daughter Ghislaine. You know, I always made the analogy, or used the analogy, I should say, of Ghislaine Maxwell being Circe and Robert Maxwell being Tywin. Now, obviously, Tywin's a way cooler cat than Robert Maxwell ever could be. But what I mean is, learning at their knee. You know, Circe in Game of Thrones thought that she was the female Tywin Lannister. And in the real world, Ghislaine Maxwell certainly thought that she was the female version of her father as well. So there's a lot of similarities between the relationship between Circe and Tywin and Robert Maxwell and Ghislaine. And as I've read more about Ghislaine Maxwell and her relationship with her father, I always think to the Circe-Tywin relationship because it's just they're so comparable when you look at how the daughters wanted to be the father so bad. Within 72 hours of her birth, Ghislaine Maxwell's life was twisted by tragedy. Baby Ghislaine was the 9th child born to Robert Maxwell, the self-made millionaire publisher, and his wife Betty. Though he had left his former name and identity far behind in a blighted corner of Czechoslovakia, Maxwell had been determined to sire a brood of 9 children and recreate the family of his birth after Adolf Hitler's forces slaughtered his siblings, both parents, and a grandfather in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Now look, as much as we dislike Maxwell and her family and what they have done, what happened to the Maxwells relatives, the grandparents, uncles, siblings, both parents, and the grandfather in Auschwitz is absolutely atrocious. Anyone who suffered under the disgusting hand of the Nazis is a sympathetic figure, in my opinion. And it's always horrible when you read backstories like this. People like Robert Maxwell, who come from a family who was ripped apart and destroyed by authoritarianism and Nazism. And then you see a guy like Robert Maxwell who lived through all of that go on and abuse the great privilege and the great power that he was afforded in the aftermath of all of that tragedy to do basically the same thing by victimizing people, obviously not to the same level of the Nazis, but you see the pattern repeat itself with Robert Maxwell. You would think somebody who lived through all of that would use that to fortify themselves and try and perform deeds of great good with the time they're given on earth. But instead, it's just completely the other way around. Maxwell got all of this power, all of this wealth, and what did he do with it? Created more sorrow, more pain, and more anguish. On Christmas Day in 1961, Ghislaine's arrival was the gift that achieved that goal. At age 38, Maxwell was at last the triumphant paterfamilias, the prosperous lord of a grand 53-room mansion in Oxford, England, 1,400 miles and a world away from his own childhood in a 2-room, earth-floored shack. And digging yourself out from poverty like this, that's admirable in my opinion, right? And it's something that should be touted. When people are able to dig themselves out of poverty and achieve great wealth and great success, that's a story that should be told over and over again. Hell, that's the American dream. But it always sickens me when you hear one of these stories of somebody like Robert Maxwell, who comes from extreme pain, extreme destruction and suffering. Somebody like this gets out of it, all of that madness. Then they create a life for themselves where they themselves in turn cause other people pain. It is just unbelievable to me when I hear stories like this. You would always think that somebody that comes from rags to riches would have a decent perspective on how the other side lives and would want to be a person who reaches out and bridges the gap and tries to help the suffering of the very same people who you come from. And we see that a lot, right? We see that with people who have succeeded. A lot of athletes go back to their neighborhoods and they help out. People who have achieved things in business go back to their neighborhoods and they help out. And that's the kind of story that I love. Then you have a story like this with Robert Maxwell, a guy who makes something from nothing and still doesn't understand and still continues with his hell-bent plan on consolidating power no matter what it means or what it causes to the very socioeconomic class that he just crawled out from. And these are the people like Robert Maxwell, who definitely have forgotten where they came from. And that was just the beginning of his disgustingness. We haven't even gotten to the whole stealing and greed part yet. This was just the way he was conducting himself, right? One of these people who claws and fights from the lower classes, finally gets a little taste, and all of a sudden thinks that they've been around the world of the so-called elite forever and moving within its corridors. And that's the kind of person Bob Maxwell was, for sure. 3 days later, the newborn's eldest brother, 15-year-old Michael, was crushed in a car accident that left him comatose for the next 6 years. This was the moment the family started to break apart, said John Preston, author of The Fall of the Last Days of Robert Maxwell, HarperCollins, out February 9th. I have that one on pre-order, by the way, because obviously there's a big story to be told here, a huge story to be told here. And when it comes to the Maxwell family, we have only scratched the surface, right? So any resource that I can read or listen to or add to the memory bank that has to do with the Maxwell clan, I am all over it at this point. Because the deep dive is on now, folks. Every weekend, every Saturday, we'll be diving into the Maxwell family from here on out until we dig into each and every one of them. So another book like this from John Preston is going to be great. Another resource to use and more information to pass on. What had hitherto been a pretty happy family became very fractured, and Ghislaine was completely overshadowed. In his book, Preston traces Robert Maxwell's tumultuous rise and mysterious 1991 death while uncovering the forces that produced his manipulative, flirtatious youngest daughter. Yeah, the forces that produced it, huh? I'll tell you, the forces that produced it was Robert Maxwell himself, Ghislaine sitting at his side and learning all the tricks of the trade. She was daddy's little girl for sure, and she really stylized herself as a female version of Robert Maxwell. Consumed by his son's condition, Maxwell clamped down on his surviving children. They led this hermetically sealed life, Preston told the Post, and they lived in increasing dread of incurring his disapproval, his wrath. And that's how it is in these kind of families, right? You have this sort of patriarch who rules with an iron fist, is in control of everything, the whole family for sure, definitely in control of the money, the fortune, trust funds. And you find all of the people that he is lording over are all deathly afraid of this person because he really holds their whole life in his palms. So, you have the siblings jostling and always attempting to gain favor with the patriarch and trying to one-up the other siblings so that they can get to that point of favor. Michael was installed in a hospital less than a mile from the family home at Headington Hill Hall. This terrible dark specter hung over the family, unspoken for the next 6 years, until Michael finally died of meningitis, Preston said. And again, look, I don't wish that on any family. I don't care how much I dislike somebody or think that they're evil. I don't ever wish this sort of thing on people's families, or it's terrible, right? I mean, as much of a scumbag as the Maxwell family is, it must have been terrible to see their kid dying in a bed like that, right? I can't even imagine, honestly. For years, Ghislaine's shattered parents could barely muster a glance in her direction. She was basically ignored, her brother Ian told Preston, and she even developed anorexia while still a toddler, Mom Betty later revealed in her memoir. Anorexia as a toddler? Jesus, I never even heard of anything like that, to be honest with you. I mean, that's a condition in toddlers? I thought anorexia was like a learned condition. Shows you how much I know. Finally, one day when she was 3 or 4, Ghislaine stood in front of her mother, stamped her foot, and said, "Mummy, I exist," Preston said. That's a bit dramatic, huh? That's a bit of a dramatic scene. I wonder who recalled that for Mr. Preston. I'm guessing from that diary, maybe? I don't know. But that must have been quite the sight, huh? Mummy, I exist? Sheesh. The dramatic scene struck a chord in her brash father, who may have seen himself in Ghislaine's willful outspokenness. Guiltily, he started showering her with attention to make up for his neglect. Much later, Betty admitted how spoiled the girl became, but Robert Maxwell never saw it. She became her father's clear favorite, Preston said. In 1987, when Robert brought a $20 million 190-foot super yacht, he dubbed it Lady Ghislaine, an incredibly divisive thing to do with a wife and 3 other daughters at home, Preston noted. Yeah, look, I could see how that could fracture the family, right? Especially in a family like this, when everybody is always on the battlefront trying to, get their piece of the pie. So I could definitely see how that could cause some divisions within the family unit, especially when you have all of these siblings jockeying for, mom and dad's approval. A similar dynamic tore at Ghislaine's father, born Jan Ludwig Hoch in 1923 to a desperately poor Jewish family in a village now in Ukraine. I was never young. I never had that privilege, Robert Maxwell said decades later. I remember how cold I was, how hungry I was, and how much I loved my mother. And look, if Robert Maxwell would have not done what he did, if he would have just had this story of rags to riches, I mean, think about it for a minute. Put it to the side all of the stuff about how disgusting this family is. Imagine this story if he would have been a good person. Imagine how this story would have been lauded and talked about and the books that would have been written about it. But instead, he takes his great power and his second opportunity at life and becomes a miserable, thieving prick. So as much as I'd love to have some compassion for what they went through, I don't. Because not everybody got that second chance. How many people were killed in those concentration camps, folks, that never got a second chance? And yet Maxwell gets this second chance, is afforded all of this great wealth and power, and absolutely shits the bed with it. Young Jan's flair for languages gave the family hope that he might become a rabbi, but at age 16, he snipped off his sidelocks and left home as World War II loomed. See, that's the kind of stuff that I don't even know about. I mean, this dude splits from his country at 16 years old, snipped off his sidelocks. I guess that's he's talking about. He had like the Hasidic curls, I'm guessing is what that means. And he left home as World War II loomed. I mean, where you going at 16? I mean, back then it was a different time though, right? How many people came to America at, 12, 13, 14, 15 without parents? So again, this could have been a different kind of story. This could have been the kind of story that you pointed to and you said, look, anything is possible if you work hard. But instead, this has become that cautionary tale of people who rose from nothing, achieved great heights socially and economically, and once got there, completely forgot who they were. He made his way to England, where he adopted a new, vaguely Scottish name, blustered his way into the British Army, and saw action in France and Germany, leaving his family to be swept away into the maw of the Holocaust. Only 2 sisters managed to survive. Well, look, the whole entire situation of World War II is so disturbing when you look at it in hindsight. My grandfather, my mother's father, was one of the first American soldiers into the concentration camps during World War II. And it had such an effect on him when he came home that he very rarely even talked about it. He was also in a Jeep on the way to liberate the concentration camps that was struck by a mortar, and everybody in the Jeep besides him ended up dying. And it affected my grandfather so greatly that he never drove a vehicle ever again when he came home from World War II. So I can't even imagine what it must have been like for people living there at the time who got swept up in this when the Nazis came and knocked on your door, dragged you out of your home, dragged your children out of your home, and you were left with no one there to defend you. I can't even imagine what that must have felt like. And I can't even imagine what it must have been like for the Allied soldiers, the first ones to get into these concentration camps, to see how disgustingly brutal these people were being treated. Everything to do with his past was still an open wound, Betty wrote in her memoir. Robert never managed to reconcile himself with his grief or overcome his guilt. Instead, he set out to become a gentleman and a squire, as he put it. His fluency in Russian, English, and French landed him assignments from Britain's intelligence services and a job running a propaganda operation in post-war Berlin. And there you start to see the beginnings of Bob Maxwell and his intelligence ties. Assignments from Britain's intelligence services, and once there, he was meeting with people from the American intelligence services, obviously the Russian intelligence services, and running a propaganda operation in post-war Berlin. So you see the burgeoning career of Robert Maxwell, the intelligence asset, right after the war. There, Robert launched his publishing empire by buying up a huge catalog of German scientific research, with the help of an unprecedented investment from MI6, Britain's foreign intelligence agency. And the second that happened, that's when Maxwell became an agent of MI6. Let's not cut corners here, folks. Let's call it for what it is. You think that MI6 is just going to donate money to somebody or, give them money to set up an operation? Hell no. It's quid pro quo. He effectively became our agent, Desmond Bristow, a former British intelligence officer, tells Preston in his book. It was a role that Maxwell apparently played for years, using his publishing perch to see disinformation to Soviet contacts and pick up data on new technology. So that's where it comes from when people say that he was working with Soviet intelligence as well, Russian intelligence. That's definitely the case. I know there was people that wanted to talk like that never happened, but we all know that Robert Maxwell was working for multiple intelligence agencies. Now, some folks will say, oh, he was a spy for these agencies. That's not the case. He was an asset. There's not very many real spies in the world like you see in the movies, okay? There are handlers and there are assets. And Robert Maxwell was an asset. Pergamon, the company he founded, established Britain's modern scientific publishing industry. But it wasn't enough for Maxwell, who soon began his lifelong practice of asset stripping, borrowing in the name of one of his businesses to make another appear more profitable. Asset stripping, huh? Let's call that what it is. That's theft from one company to artificially inflate the price of another. Okay? See, this is where greed comes in. Maxwell could have had a great life just doing what he was doing, but he needed more. More power, more money, more wealth, more contacts. And little Ghislaine sitting at his knee, well, she was taking notes. By 1969, his fiscal double-dealing came to a head. When an American company on the verge of buying a Pergamon subsidiary got a look at its books, Maxwell was pushed out of the parent company, which was, most awkwardly, headquartered on the grounds of his Oxford home. Ghislaine was 7 at the time. Yeah, well, of course, they get a look at the books, they see that they're being cooked, they see that they're garbage, they see what's going on, and of course they're going to push them to the side. But do you think a guy like Robert Maxwell is going to suffer real penalties? Of course not. With all of his contacts, his intelligence protection, this guy had a get-out-of-jail-free card, as they say. The children had the run of the house and grounds, Preston said. Suddenly, they go down to the basement, and there's this bloody great iron gate there. Outside, there's a wooden fence topped with barbed wire. It was sort of a one-man version of West Berlin. How weird must that have been? This place is on the grounds of your home, and now the family doesn't own it, and there's a big-ass gate with barbed wire? Sheesh. So I guess the moral of the story there and the lesson to be learned is, well, don't have your company at your house. Pergamon's new owners had installed the barriers to physically exile Maxwell from the company's offices located in an outbuilding that shared a cellar with the family home. Oh my gosh, I didn't know any of that, honestly. They were dark times, Ian Maxwell said. There seemed to be a fear in the air, a fear that we would be ostracized. Well, your father shouldn't be such a thief. If he wasn't a thief and if he didn't cook the books, you would never have to worry about someone building a gate to cut your basement in half. Robert Maxwell rebounded, again, by dint of some shady fiscal maneuvering. He used one of his minor companies to siphon funds out of Pergamon and sequester them outside Britain. After 5 years of lawsuits and slow fiscal strangulation, he regained control of his company. Look, Robert Maxwell was a lot of things, but he was a very shrewd businessman, the kind of man that will look to crush you if you cross him. And we see that here with how he regained control of Pergamon, when he went in there and basically gave him the I find your lack of faith disturbing Vader throat crush. See, it becomes personal to people like this. It's not business. It is always personal. Right, Maxwell told the Pergamon board the day he won the battle. We're taking over now. You can all go. That afternoon, he had the fence and barriers torn down. There was something not so much amoral about him as premoral, Peter J., Maxwell's top aide in the 80s, would later say, as if he was wholly unaware of things like good and evil. Yeah, that's called a sociopath, okay? That's exactly what that's called. This dude, he didn't know the difference between good and evil because he was living in a falsified world. The same world that all of these so-called elite that we're dealing with in the Epstein case still inhabit. In 1984, Maxwell bought Britain's top tabloid, the Daily Mirror. The acquisition established him as a political player. No Labour government could succeed without the Mirror's support, and gave his enormous ego a stage to match his rapidly expanding girth. Maxwell's face appeared in the Mirror's pages 100 times in his first 6 months as publisher. So he used the Mirror to definitely grow his stature, right? And also to give him more political power. Because what is the old adage? The pen is mightier than the sword. So if he owned the Mirror and he was in charge of the stories about politics, well, that makes him a very, very powerful player on the stage and somebody that is politically dangerous for the political class. It also gave a new role to 22-year-old Ghislaine, who promoted the paper's sweepstakes contests and became her father's unofficial goodwill ambassador, boosting her social visibility as she hosted corporate parties and acted as the Mirror's poster girl in promotions. So she was being moved along by dad, right? Getting, one step at a time. She started taking over as the ambassador, dealing with like parties and that kind of thing. So basically a marketing position is what Maxwell gave Ghislaine. Maxwell's urge for acquisition soon turned to America. In 1991, he pounced on the foundering New York Daily News. Ghislaine tagged along, first to run Maxwell's Corporate Gifts, a New York-based vanity business bankrolled by her father, then to serve as his American social emissary, attending social events like now Governor Cuomo's wedding to Kerry Kennedy in 1990 on his behalf. Well, isn't that nice? Governor Cuomo? Was it nice to have Ghislaine at your wedding, sir? All of these people are such a bunch of clowns, such a bunch of idiots. In March 1991, Maxwell made an impressive New York entrance on the Lady Ghislaine, sailing the yacht up the East River as he arrived to finalize the Daily News deal. But to keep the paper afloat, he sold Pergamon, his crown jewel, and secretly raided the Mirror's pension funds. And I strongly believe that Jeffrey Epstein played a huge part in laundering those and helping him raid the pensions, and move this money. I am very, very, very convinced that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in that. Now, we don't have direct evidence yet, right? I mean, I don't have a paper trail, but my gut certainly tells me that's the case. With all of the evidence we have available. 8 months later, Maxwell, 68, was dead. He had taken a short cruise aboard the Lady Ghislaine through the Canary Islands to try to shake a nagging cold, he said, ahead of a scheduled November 5th meeting with the governor of the Bank of England. There, he would have to explain the Maxwell's corporation billion-pound debt load, distributed among at least 9 different international banks and investment firms, and the massive hole in its pensions reserve. So he had all of this on the agenda. He goes out on the Lady Ghislaine near the Canary Islands, goes for a sail, and then happens to die, just coincidentally dies a few days before he has this hearing, huh? Falls off the boat and is floating around, and he doesn't get eaten by sharks or anything? I don't get it. But that morning, as the ship docked after an all-night sail, Robert Maxwell could not be found on board. Hours later, a helicopter crew spotted his naked, spread-eagled body afloat in the Atlantic. 2 autopsies could not conclusively prove a cause of death. Yeah, that's not shady or anything. I'm sure he was naked up on the deck of the boat, having an Alan Dershowitz moment, playing with the volleyball, bumping it back and forth to himself. And he happened to have a heart attack and fell off the boat, butt-ass naked, and that's how he died. What? Anyone check for any poison or anything like that? Because certainly looks like this is a bit fishy. The scandal that exploded in the days after Maxwell's death led to the arrests of brothers Ian and Kevin, who both held top positions in the family's now bankrupt business empire, but denied knowledge of their father's dealings. Both were charged with several counts of conspiracy to defraud, and the case went to trial in 1995. But they were both acquitted the following year. Oh, of course they were. People like this, well, they don't go to jail. They don't get found guilty. You got to be a low-level employee for that to happen. But Ghislaine was probably more affected by the death of her father than any of her siblings, Preston said. She became his greatest defender, insisting that he could not have committed suicide and that a conspiracy of rogue spies and contract killers had murdered him. I actually agree with that, to be honest with you. I definitely agree that Robert Maxwell was clipped. Come on, man. You really think this guy just died all of a sudden, running around in his birthday suit? He's running around with everything God gave him, swinging in the wind. Well, what was he doing? Listening to, some music, having a dance-off on the bow of the ship, and he fell in? None of it makes sense. Come on. The only thing that is logical, in my opinion here, is that Maxwell was clipped. In purely financial terms, she was left high and dry, he noted. At age 29, Ghislaine had put more effort into socializing than developing a career. Au contraire. That was her career, socializing. Building relationships for her and Epstein. So no, that was her career. With the family's business empire in ruins, she could count on only a trust fund income of £80,000 a year, about $190,000 in today's dollars, barely enough to cover one of the extravagant parties she threw in her society days as Good Times Ghislaine. Imagine crying about $190,000 a year in a trust fund. $190,000 a year. And she's broke, she's destitute. Here's an idea: change your lifestyle. Go back to school. Do something. But instead, she was so greedy and so hungry for power that she links up with Jeffrey Epstein, and they kick this whole entire criminal enterprise into motion. But she did have an enviable address book. As public scorn rained down back at home in Britain, Ghislaine settled in the relative anonymity of New York in 1992. She took an Upper East Side apartment and started rifling through her Rolodex to sell high-end real estate to members of her wealthy social circle. Within months, She was dating financier, pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Wrong, wrong, wrong. You mean she was in business with Jeffrey Epstein? That's what you mean, right? Enough with the love and dating shit. That was the cover. He saved her, a friend told Vanity Fair. When her father died, she was a wreck, inconsolable. And then Jeffrey took her in. She's never forgotten that, and never will. You mean the business situation that her father and the handlers had set up, kicked into motion? That's what you mean, right? Took her in my ass. The relationship was romantic for only a short time. Cover story. But their alliance endured for years. Fact. Epstein gave her security. Ghislaine gave him entree to everyone from Prince Andrew and Naomi Campbell to Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. She managed some of his many properties. A former employee of Epstein's Palm Beach home called her the lady of the house, and sometimes used her helicopter's pilot's license to ferry him to his private Caribbean island, and also from the airport in Santa Fe to Zorro Ranch, confirmed by sources that I spoke to face to face. There, he sated his appetite for sex with teenage girls, and Ghislaine reportedly enabled him and joined him, okay? Why are we still cutting corners here, New York Post? Let's get with it. Accusers say Maxwell acted as Epstein's madam, recruiting girls as young as 14 to give him, air quotes, massages that soon devolved into sexual encounters, and to have sex with his friends. Some have said that she sexually abused them herself. Some have said that, in fact. Yes, I'm glad that you brought it up, because it sure seemed like nobody wants to talk about that portion of it. Maxwell is credibly accused by multiple girls of abusing them. The allegations made against me are abhorrent and entirely untrue, she has repeatedly said. Epstein avoided federal prosecution on sex trafficking charges in 2007 with a sweetheart deal that saw him plead guilty to lesser crimes in Florida, but died under suspicious circumstances in a New York prison in 2019. Maxwell, busted last July in a raid on a New Hampshire hideaway, remains under arrest on charges of recruiting and grooming 3 teenage girls for sexual abuse between 1994 and 1997. And as we all know, that's not all. That's a to-be-continued situation as far as the charges. But she still has the support of her 2 closest siblings, Kevin and Ian. Both have been involved in the legal effort to bail their sister out of jail before her scheduled July 2021 trial, Preston said, and they staunchly insist on her innocence. Well, yeah, of course they do. A, they're her siblings, and B, fellow travelers, right? It's not like we're talking about people here who are pillars of the community. So we'll be talking about Ian and Kevin as well, no doubt about it. It seems she immediately gravitated from her father's orbit to Epstein, but they were very different men, Preston concluded. Maxwell was a tremendously overbearing, ogre-like figure, very much his own front man. Epstein preferred operating in the shadows, but Ghislaine, if the stories are true, was a kind of front woman for Epstein, a skill she learned at her father's knee. No, she wasn't a front woman for it. Co-conspirator. Equal bosses, okay? Equal power. It was a power-sharing structure that they were working under. Maxwell was in charge of the socials and helping with the grooming, and Epstein was in charge of the money and the rest. What is not in dispute, in my opinion, however, was that Ghislaine Maxwell wanted to be her father so bad and learned how to conduct herself in this wide world of lies, thievery, and corruption right at his knee. And folks, she was obviously paying attention. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. And to everybody who has donated to the podcast recently, thank you folks very, very much. All right, everybody, I will be back later and we will pick up where we left off. Have a great day, everyone.
At Ease, we're all about calculating the best high for you. Ran out of shows to watch for the second time this week? Order an indica pre-roll. Social distance park hang? Pair that awkward picnic with a vaporizer. See, we're like your weed guy, but 420% nerdier. So just worry about when you're going to take that edible and let us do the rest. Ease, highly calculated cannabis delivery. Get 30% off your first order with promo code NERD at ease.com. That's EAZE.com. At Ease, we're all about calculating the best high for you. Ran out of shows to watch for the second time this week? Order an indica pre-roll. Social distance park hang? Pair that awkward picnic with a vaporizer. See, we're like your weed guy, but 420% nerdier. So just worry about when you're going to take that edible and let us do the rest. Ease, highly calculated cannabis delivery. Get 30% off your first order with promo code NERD at ease.com. That's EAZE.com.